Hello everybody, welcome back to the Lucy Superfox Show. My name is Lucy Superfox and this is my podcast and channel. And on today's episode, I want to dive into overcoming overwhelm and how to do it in 3 simple steps. So without further ado, let's dive in. So welcome back. I am off the back of a corporate workshop today on nervous system and understanding resilience in the concept of something called polyvagal theory, which I've talked about many times on this podcast and in many masterclasses. But truthfully, that is that when we understand the nervous system isn't just on or off, and actually the nervous system has emotional states and depth and wisdom that we can completely transform our lives. So as I come off that crazy energy and sharing the things I love the most, I wanted to share with you the most chronic symptom I see with numbers of my clients, and especially in the corporate environment I've been in today. So overwhelm, I think, is the number one cause of procrastination. It's the number one cause of putting off the things that we know we should do. And actually, it's the number one cause of not getting things done, not being productive, and not putting ourselves out there. Now, overwhelm is a feeling. To me, it feels like the world is on my shoulders, like everything's built up, like I'm not on top of anything. And I really only ever get overwhelmed when I'm emotionally overwhelmed. When emotionally I'm not able to name how I feel, and so in turn I become overwhelmed and my system shuts down. Now, we can become overwhelmed with a workload. We can become overwhelmed with a situation. We can become overwhelmed more generally from just constant and chronic stimulation. But that feeling of overwhelm is creating the same state inside your body. And that state is a state of shutdown. A state of this is too much going on, there's too much threat, there's too much danger, boom, shut down. And that's why sometimes it's so hard to get out of the feeling of overwhelm, because when our body is in that shutdown or freeze state, we need to activate it from a place of safety, not from a place of stimulation. And what happens when we get overwhelmed by something like work is we're throwing ourselves back into the danger or back into the fire, but we haven't necessarily created the state to be able to do it any different, and we find ourselves overwhelmed all over again. A constant pattern I see here is everybody starting Monday super fresh, and by Wednesday they're overwhelmed, exhausted, in paralysis, can't function. Thursday they're super inefficient, and Friday they just cannot wait to get home from work. And that's because the nervous system has had the weekend to recalibrate, the opportunity to kind of like rest and repair, goes in on Monday with a fresh mind. But because we haven't taught ourselves how to regulate when we experience stress, what happens is the nervous system gets overwhelmed and shuts down again. And this is fine if this doesn't bother you, but the truth is most of us are so incredibly frustrated by overwhelm, especially me. I find it incredibly frustrating when there's something I want to do, there's something I want to create, there's something like this podcast today. I've probably done 942 bloopers of this podcast because my nervous system is a little cooked. Because I've taught all day, been delivering workshop, and I've come into this podcast and I'm feeling a little fried. But I wanted to do this podcast today whilst I'm also in this up-regulated energy. So when we get overwhelmed, we end up in this place of shutdown, this place of like freeze response. And from there, we can't create anything awesome. Because when we try to move ourselves from a freeze response back into an activated response, we often over-trigger the sympathetic nervous system and we end up putting ourselves back in shutdown all over again. And when that happens on repeat, that becomes a default setting. And then we end up getting too stressed, shut down, too stressed, shut down, too stressed, shut down. And then we don't actually ever feel like what it's like to feel a baseline of well-being or joy or connected or grounded or present. And this is how we can create an entire life that feels overwhelming, overbearing, and one that we just don't want to navigate. So when overwhelm strikes, there are 3 things that I now do for myself and that I'd recommend to you and to my clients that might support you in moving out of that chronic freeze mode and beyond the sympathetic activation into a more grounded state. So the first one is A, for awareness. What was the trigger or the final straw that sent you into overwhelm? Now, it might not be complicated or a big deal. You might be thinking, oh, Luce, it's just something so simple. It was just that one other email. It was just the kid dropping the dinner plate on the floor. It was just the fact that I thought I'd done everything on my to-do list and realised there was a second page. But getting really aware of what the trigger was before we went into overwhelm is a really good indication of where our energetic capacity lies. Our energetic capacity, our ability to do things, is different for every single person based on the state and health of their nervous system. So when you're finding yourself being overwhelmed by small things, it was never about the small thing, it was about what preceded it. But what's so useful to identify is when it was triggered into overwhelm, when was that final straw, is to be able to look at what went before it and work out where our capacity currently is now. Because when we deny where we are, when we push down and pretend that tomorrow will be better or next week will be different, nothing actually changes. But when we get really aware of where our capacity currently is, what we're actually able to do, what would some people would call a window of tolerance, or what our nervous system is able to tolerate or take on, when we're able to really identify that, that's when the game changes. Because rather than trying to rise to the level of what we need to do, actually I recommend that clients sometimes shrink to the level of their nervous system. And that's not permanent, it's not forever, it's not keeping you small, but it is allowing you to feel safe. Because a nervous system that isn't chronically overloaded and that isn't chronically overwhelmed and isn't chronically ending back up in this shutdown freeze response is a nervous system that feels safe to expand, is a nervous system that feels safe to experience stress in small ways. But when we constantly try to go from 0 to 100, 0 to 100, 0 to 100, we end up in this chronic freeze response and we wonder why things like burnout repeat. So when we're feeling overwhelmed and we've identified what that initial trigger is that sent us over the edge or was the icing on the cake, what that enables us to do is draw a line from, okay, I started this morning and I felt this way, it took these things and it got me to here. That's a real indication of where you actually are. And just because that's where you are now doesn't mean it's where you need to stay, but getting aware of where you actually are and what's actually happening is the first step to creating real change. Because sometimes we've got big ideas and big visions, and lots of entrepreneurs and solopreneurs that I work with have these enormous visions for what they want for their life, but it's so far away from what their nervous system can actually hold. That's why it never feels like it's happening. That's why it gets overwhelming to think about how you would go from doing a 2K month to a 20K month, because your nervous system is so far away from that. So instead, the answer isn't to reduce your vision, but instead right now to shrink the next step. So that might be writing your to-do list in a way that isn't a long list and actually is broken down by 10 to 11, these 2 things, 11 to 12, these 3 things. Or it might be that if it is to do with goals or output or metrics, that actually you start looking at it in different ways. Remember, we all learn in different styles too. But when we find ourselves not actually aware of why we're overwhelmed, there's not much we can do with that. So my first piece of advice is get really aware of what was the thing that tipped you over the edge. And before that happened, what were the pieces that happened in sequence that led to your capacity being overcooked? Now, the truth is most of us don't go into each day with an abundance of capacity, with a beautiful energy and an amazing regulated nervous system because life happens, right? And unless you're already making nervous system regulation your number one priority every single morning and every single night, you're a human, that's not going to be the case. So sometimes identifying that actually it's how we went into our day that led to the overwhelm is also really insightful and supportive. So recognizing what energy you woke up in, what created that. Is it that you need to prioritize sleep hygiene? How are you starting your day? What is starting your day creating for the rest of your day? Because our nervous system capacity or our energetic capacity and mental clarity is determined by what we do. And it's determined by what we do from first thing in the morning to the point of overwhelm. It was never the thing that created the overwhelm, but it was the addition of all these things added up that our nervous system could no longer tolerate, and that's what put us back into freeze. So the first step is awareness. The second step is to take a breath, and by that, absolutely connect with the breath, reground with the body if it's safe and supportive for you to do so, but more than anything, to step away. So whether that is stepping away from your desk for 2 minutes, whether it's going for a brisk walk around the block, whether it's actually grounding yourself into something like a meditation or just a small moment of silence, counting and hearing the breath. Because when we're in the moment, the energy of overwhelm, we're in what feels like a freight train you can't stop. You're in this like passionate drive, and my brain, I'm a very loud thinker, I'm a very deep thinker, my brain goes woo, 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 and it's spinning. It's spinning with all the things that could have been. It's spinning with all the hypotheses of the future. I am an instant catastrophizer. That's a long word. That's tricky to say. You try it. Because my brain has kept me safe my whole life. I've always thought that if I knew how and I knew why, then I would be safe. And the truth was a huge part of that was my neurodiversity, helping me understand myself, knowing how and why, thought I'd be able to make sense of my life and my emotions. But when we are so in everything, when we're so in the overwhelm, we're not able to see a clear path out. But when we take a step back, we take a breath, we take a break, right? We allow ourselves to create distance between us and the thing. And that's when we start to add this objective layer. And this objective layer then gets to go, it wasn't that last task on the list that, that was the icing on the cake. Actually, what it was the way I got up this morning. I actually didn't prioritize spending 10 minutes for myself before I thought about everybody else. Or actually when I woke, I didn't sleep well last night and I thought a caffeinated coffee would be a good idea. And actually it sent me into, it was too caffeinated and it sent my nervous system on the edge. Like getting really clear happens in awareness, but also when we take that breath and we're able to zoom out from it. Because in that zoom out, that gives us step number 3, which is clarity on what is it we actually need to do next. Because the truth is, some of us have performance metrics. Some of us, maybe in your job, you actually don't have the option to take a step back and do it tomorrow. Maybe it does have to get done right now, today. So the answer then is creating a space and an environment and energy where you can step back into your body, step back into the activity, and not have overwhelm take over all over again. But in order to do that, you have to have the awareness to recognize that you're in overwhelm and what created it. 2, to create some distance and take a breath. And C, so you can get clarity about what it is you need to do. Sometimes when we look at this massive to-do list or things that need to get done, or maybe you're looking at a messy house, or you're thinking about getting the kids out of the house and one's sick and one's overwhelmed, and there's noise from the telly, and actually there's a nervous system, physical overwhelm going on. Again, these same things apply. Get aware, notice the noise around you, notice the chaos, take a breath, and get clear about what's the next thing you need to do. I can get so caught up in all the things I need to do that I can send my brain into an absolute spiral. So instead I just focus on what's the next thing, or what is the one thing that I was saying to clients inside programs, what's the one thing that's going to make the biggest difference and impact to my life, to my business, to my kids, whatever the goal is today. What is the one thing that's going to make the biggest difference? Because we give so much meaning to all the things. We think that everything on the to-do list has the same level of value, but it doesn't. Not in a business, not in a relationship, not in a body goal, not with your parents, not with your children. It does not have the same level. Sometimes small things have big impacts, and sometimes big things have small impacts. So the key is, what is the priority, or what is the next thing that's going to shift things forward? But we can't create that prioritization. We can't create that strategic thinking when we're in the energy of the overwhelm. So we have to get out of the perspective of the overwhelm in order to then create space. We have to take that breath that can give us the clarity to look at what is the thing we need to move forward with next. And from clarity is from there, we need to also witness what we need to do for ourselves to increase our energetic capacity. Now, truthfully, energetic capacity is a fluffy term that floats around the internet, but what it really means is your ability to handle things and come back to a baseline of well-being. And that looks different for every single person. But well-being looks like feeling grounded, feeling present, feeling connected, feeling like you can have relations or feel like you can have conversations with people that make you feel safe and supported. And when you're not coming back to baseline because you're staying in either this chronic activated state, this chronic rumination, this chronic overwhelm, this chronic fear state, or you're in a chronic shutdown state, that's not energetic capacity. That's a pattern or a cycle, but there's no capacity there. There's no room for growth, right? There's no resilience there. There's also no, emotional expansion there. And I think, a lot of people that are attracted to this podcast are interested in manifestation, want to create a life of more money, want a bigger business. But the truth is, you cannot create anything more from an energy of survival. Because when we do, we're creating it from energy of desperation. We're creating it from energy of hustle or performance. And that means that's the only way we'll sustain that thing. So when we want to grow and expand a business, a life, we want to be a more present mom, that starts with increasing energetic capacity. So what we have to do in order to do that is we have to bring regulation to the nervous system. We have to allow the nervous system to come back to that baseline of well-being that looks different for every single person. Now, truthfully, not everybody knows what that baseline of well-being feels like. I didn't know what it felt like to feel good and to feel safe my entire life. It's only been in the last 3 to 4 years that I've actually understood that feeling safe and connected and grounded isn't something that's passing. It's not a fleeting moment. This is a life experience, and this is what it's supposed to feel like. I would sabotage it at every corner. I would find a way to go, oh, things feel too good, let's destroy something, unconsciously, because safety, ironically, felt unsafe. Safety to the body is familiarity, not actual practical safety. And so when we want to create energetic capacity, when we want to create a capacity to come back to a baseline of well-being, that takes repetition, right? That takes teaching the body that feeling safe is safe, that teaching the body that feeling joyful and connected and grounded is safe in the right environment. And so when we want to create energetic capacity, we have to close the loop. So when you end up in these peak states, whether it's a freeze and shutdown, whether it's that fight-flight response of anxiety or that always-on energy that shows up right before overwhelm, we have to help the body come back to that energy of safety. And we can't intellectualize it. We can't say, I'm safe, I'm safe, I'm safe, I'm safe. Look, the body does hear what the mind says, but 80% of the energy goes the other way from the body to the mind, right? So the body is what needs to feel safe. And so this is where some of the practices inside my emotional mastery toolkit are going to be your best friends. Because those practical tools take less than 60 seconds. And in that 60-second short window, they cue safety to your body. They cue, it's safe to relax here. It's safe to take a breath. It's safe here on a nervous system level. And they do that through varying methods depending on which one you pick. So if you want to get the Emotional Mastery Toolkit, you can get it at lucysuperfox.com/toolkit, and you can get it in the show notes below. I created this toolkit because one of the biggest things around emotions is that they either become something to blame. So it's just my anxiety, it's just my overwhelm, I just can't handle it. Or they become something that is the bane of our lives because we don't understand them. Everything's going well. Why do I feel anxious? Oh, everything was going well so yesterday and now I'm so frustrated and I can't get over it. Oh, I'm just ruminating in guilt about that thing I said 3 weeks ago. Why can't I be in the present moment? And so as part of this toolkit, I also made a 60-minute masterclass on why do I feel this way and making your emotions make sense, alongside a 14-page downloadable workbook to help you work through the prompts around the nervous system, around your emotions in real time. So if becoming a master of your emotions and overcoming overwhelm is on your list for 2026, then the toolkit is going to be your best friend. So you can get it at lucysuperfox.com/toolkit. So we can overcome overwhelm, but we have to witness and recognize where our nervous system is, one, signaling to us that overwhelm's on the way. And we can do that through bringing awareness when it happens, taking a breath and creating distance, and then applying clarity to look at what we need to do differently. The truth is most of us live an overloaded life, overloaded with technology, with stimulation, with responsibility, with pressure. But the only answer that we have to overcoming that overwhelm is to take a step back from the intensity of it all and to actually start by trying to create that safety inside the body ahead of time. Trying to always respond reactively isn't always the solution because you're so programmed and on autopilot, you'll end up in the same pattern of behavior over and over again. I'm sure you felt this way with 5 biscuits down. You're like, oh, how did I get here? You've drunk half a glass of wine. You're like, whoops, wasn't supposed to be drinking. Or you've forgotten your way home from work in the car, right? Because you're so programmed and on autopilot, and your body's doing that because its only and sole job is to keep you alive. But when you want to change the way you look, change the way you feel, be more productive at work, put yourself out there more, be more confident, show up on camera, whatever your goals might be, that relies on your system not shutting itself down because it takes on too much. But that starts with you creating that capacity from building that nervous system regulation, from building a place of safety, otherwise known as well-being, inside your nervous system. And that starts with the small practices like inside the toolkit, and sometimes the deep work that's often required with women who've been through a lot. So look, overcoming overwhelm isn't something that cannot be done, but it is something that needs attention and focus. Your first step is to get aware. What was the thing that created that final straw? Second, to take a breath, take a break, and take a step back from it and look at it with a zoomed out perspective. And 3 is to use that zoomed out perspective to build clarity around one, what maybe you need to do differently, and then what you need to do next. And from there, all things are possible. So I hope this has been a supportive episode. I hope there's been clarity for you here. I hope that you've allowed yourself to feel seen and heard in my words and my experiences. And I hope more than anything that this allows you to make sense of why you feel the way you do and ultimately to change it. So I love sharing this with you, and I will see you on the next episode.